attention is a crucial human skill, yet many of us have forgotten how to listen carefully and observe intentionally. I'm Chester Elton, and this is my dear friend and co-author, Adrian Gostick.
I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. What was that, Chester? Hey, thanks. We're delighted to be here with you today. And, of course, we are deluged by social media, hobbled by increasing social isolation that fosters. And so I agree, we do need to rediscover the human ways we connect with others. And our guest today began a course at the New School in New York City called Human Observation, and it's been hugely popular. There are hundreds of students filling the waiting list. And as always, we hope the time you spend with us today will help reduce the stigma of anxiety at work and in your personal life.
And with us today is our new friend, Christian Mesbier. He is a writer, he speaks, he teaches on the practical application of human sciences. His work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, Financial Times, The Washington Post, and Bloomberg Businessweek. He is the author of the new book from Penguin Random House, Look, How to Pay Attention in a Distracted World. Christian, we are delighted to have you on our podcast. Thanks for taking the time.
Me too, Chester and Adrian. It'll be fun.
Yeah, we're delighted. This is such a great question. That's why when we saw your information, your book coming out, we were so excited to have you on. I remember, when I first started out working in the downtown busy, I went out one lunchtime and some random guy stopped me on the street and he says, "Hey, listen," he says, "do you hear the birds?" And I looked up on the top of the buildings. I'd never noticed. There were all these birds, and they were all chirping and making noises. And he says, "You need to listen more." And it just sort of struck me. So why do we need to be more observant as humans? What are we missing in our surroundings and in our lives?
I think we observe all day, all of us, but we do it in different ways. And I think we've gotten away, unfortunately, from very direct observation. So I think we lead rather abstract lives now, and particularly in the last 3 or 4 years, where we're quite distant from the things we're working on. So you can imagine a journalist working in a newspaper. They're very, very far from the people that are actually reading their things, or an executive from an automaker are very far away from the people that are driving cars and trying to find their way around in the world and get home with their kids and so on. So the further away we are from the phenomena, the social world, the human world that we're dealing with, the more abstract life becomes and the more miserable we become. And the class I did over the course of almost a decade was to try to teach students to observe with great intent and care. And I hear from them all the time. Every week I hear from them, even though it was maybe 8 years ago since they took the class, and they say this was the most helpful thing, and we use it every day.
Isn't that interesting? Better at observing. You say you spend a lot of time observing the worlds each of us make for ourselves. I think that's such an interesting way to say that, because we create our own worlds and our own environments. So how can we get better at these observational skills? What do you teach in that class?
Right. So it's a big class, of course. So it's a whole semester. But at the heart of it is a type of observation that I call hyper-reflection. And if you imagine, it's just a sort of a simple scenario. You walk down the street and you see buses and you see schools and school children. You see trucks coming and going, bicycles coming and going. The way we observe that naturally, humans naturally observe that situation, is almost like a panoptic attention. We don't pay attention to anything in particular. We just know how to go down the street. And if we drive, we know that if it's 8 o'clock and there's a school, we need to pay particular attention to that thing. And it's not even crossing our mind. It has nothing to do with language, has nothing to do with concept. There's no thought involved. It just happens. That's a kind of first level attention. And that first level attention is, panoptic. The second level of attention is we can look at that and we can think about it. So if you walk down the street, you can see that's a truck, it's red, and it drives fast. That's a particular focused attention where everything else goes away. You just focus on that one thing. And the third thing, the third level of attention, which is hyper-reflection, is to observe how people observe, and think about how people think, and see about how people see. So you observe how others find their way around in the world. So it's not focus. It's not panoptic. It's not focused attention. It is figuring out, based on what do people do what they do? Based on what do they find their way down the street? And that type of hyper-reflection is what we taught in the class, and what I think is helpful in whatever walk of life you have.
That is so interesting, because we've all had the experience, whether we're driving or walking, and we'll be lost in thought, and all of a sudden we've arrived. It's like your body just knew how to get there, right? And you haven't observed anything other than the fact that I started and now I'm here. As you were talking, I thought, if there's ever a crime committed, I hope you're the one observing, because you'll be the person that remembers all the cars, all the details, and the license plate numbers. Did I get that right?
I would probably not be so focused on that. I would be focused on the people that are there and how they operate. So I would be interested in, based on what is this happening? Like, why are they doing what they're doing in this situation? So I wouldn't remember the license plate at all. I would be interested in what's going through their lives at that moment, and what's the structure of it.
That's what I wanted to dig in a little with you, because I watched a video that your team had done, and it was a little bit about, people say, oh, I only buy organic, but then you go into their houses and, no, it's not really that way. Or I only do this, I only do that. So what you do is you identify gaps between what people say their lives are and how they really live. So talk a little bit about the gaps and what you observe, and maybe how those gaps are causing us tension, and maybe how we observe them. If you could get into that a little bit.
Right. So obviously we don't know what we want. Like, it's so obvious if you just spend 5 minutes with a human. We can't talk about it. We have a hard time imagining what we need beyond basic things. And most of the time, we don't make any decisions at all. We just zoom through life, and we get influenced by the world around us. So I usually say, I'm not interested in individuals. I don't care. What I care about is how that individual is socialized into the things that he or she believes in the moment. So it's not so much, if you ask people what they want, they wouldn't know. But if you look at them, you would be able to see what would work in their life and what they miss in their life. So there's this myth, it's almost like a philosophical myth, that we somehow have access to our beliefs and desires and wants, and we can express them with clarity and honesty. That's basically the assumption under why people would interview consumers in consumer panels, or ask them what they're going to vote, for instance. For me, that's an absurd idea, that people would be able to describe that with any precision if you asked them. So instead of that, I'd rather see them in their context, figure out what are they doing in their own context, how do they make up their world, and based on what do they make their decisions. There's this German philosopher called Martin Heidegger, and he has this very German and very Martin Heidegger word called woraufhin, and it means basically that on the basis of which. So on the basis of what are we finding a way down the street the way we are, or are we voting in a particular way, or are we buying one car over another? So I'm not interested in individuals, and I don't think we can formulate much of why we're doing what we're doing, although it's observable.
Okay, so deep thoughts here as I'm trying to absorb all that. Let's take it to the workplace. The workplace is getting ever more distracting, hybrid work, remote work. So how would we apply this to work, and why would it benefit us if we were to be more focused?
So I've hired thousands of people in my life. And the one thing I looked for was presence and intensity in observation, rather than a tendency for abstraction. So I think abstraction is always the enemy. Being abstracted away from other people that you work with, which can happen through technology. Happened the last 3-4 years, we've been living even more abstracted relationship to others. I think it's abstraction in the relationship to what you're working on. So if you work in a food company, you better care about the people that are eating it, rather than seeing it as numbers or market shares or something like that. So I think abstraction is the core problem we have. I'm sorry if there's a noise here, because the sky just opened in the most glorious way. So much.
You're observing. That's great. Yeah.
I love it. So talk a little bit more about finish the thinking on at work. So if I'm an employee, I love this idea that I want to be hireable, I want to be promotable. So that what you're saying is, look, executives are looking for somebody who is present, who's attentive. These are skills to develop.
They are. They're teachable and they're learnable, and you can practice them just like you can go to the gym. So let's say you work in an automaker. Let's say you work with an automotive company. If you just lead your life in the headquarters, and all you do is following steps of a process that's abstract and defined by someone else, I think you're less helpful than if you spend time with the people that eventually is going to engage with the machines you're making. Yeah. If you make software, and all you do is thinking about abstract code and not how that software is going to be part of people's lives, I think you will you will feel bad about it. You'll feel lost and you'll feel disconnected from the world. But I also think you would be much less precise and effective in the way you work and the way your life, the way your work life plays out. If you don't have that relationship to the final lived reality of whatever you're making, then you'll just feel like you're humming along. And I don't think you would, I think you'd feel alienated from the world. And I saw my students fall apart when the world got more and more abstract. And I think it's simply not good for us in any way to lead abstract lives.
Well, you talk a little bit about empathy. So I'm curious, which is the chicken and the egg? Which does observing lead to more empathy, or do we need more empathy to look more closely?
So that is a good question. Now, I think direct observation of something is completely undermining to prejudice. I think if you have strong opinions about homelessness and you haven't looked at it, you haven't carefully engaged with people that don't know where they're going to sleep tonight, I think if you did observe, you had all your preconceived notions, all your judgment, like immediate judgment of it, will be undermined by the actual reality of somebody living in a way that where they don't know where to sleep tonight. And I think judgment, on the other hand, is completely undermining to observation. So if you already know what it's like to be someone before you've even looked, you will do very bad observation. So in that sense, it's sort of dual, that observation is undermining to judgment, and judgment is undermining to observation. So, I'm on the side of observation. I'm on the side of a direct relationship to the world in order to challenge our own assumptions and our own sort of preconceived notions about how the world works. And I've seen people grow by engaging directly. And I've seen them take leaps in terms of how they understand something. Instead of reading about it, looking at graphs about it, hearing other people's opinions about it, just go by yourself and look.
It's so interesting, isn't it? I live just outside New York City. And it is so interesting. You go into the city and there's so much going on and people disappear until you find that homeless person that actually engages with you or you engage with them. And then it becomes very real very quickly.
Right.
You know, I had a friend of mine said, do you give money to the homeless people? And I said, yes, from time to time I do, or food or whatever. And he said, do you ever ask them their names? And I thought that was really interesting. He said, no, I've never done that. He says, next time, introduce yourself. Say, my name is Chester, what's yours? And then it becomes much more personal and much more real when someone has a name and not just somebody on the side of the road or the side of the sidewalk. That observation is really powerful. Thanks for bringing back that memory for me. I appreciate that. Hey, Christian, how do people find more about your work? Where do they find your new book? Where do they find more information about this wonderful work you're doing?
Well, books are available where books are available. So I think you can find the book or the other books on Amazon or any other bookstore. I hope you buy it locally, though. I hope you buy it in your bookstore down the street. We need those stores to exist. And what do you find about me? Well, I have a website called Mesbjerg, which is my surname, .com, where you can find out a little bit about me. I'm not very active on social media because I find it highly distracting.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Well, and for those of you that are listening, the book title is Look How to Pay Attention in a Distracted World, available on Amazon, local bookstores, and wherever fine books are sold. So
we're also interested, Christian, in the self-care tactics of people like yourself. So has this been a journey for you? Have you taught yourself to do this? And how daily do you go about this process of, because there must be distractions in your life like every other. How do you focus yourself every day? What are the tactics that you use?
For me, human societies and human emotion and human life is just magical. I don't need more than walking out the door to see how on earth is this happening. Like if you think about it, I live on 13th Street in Manhattan, and when I walk down the street, you see just traffic, and you see how people, imagine millions of people go into their car, and then somehow every morning, and then somehow they go from where they are to where they need to go without crashing much. Like it's unbelievable that it doesn't melt down every day. But somehow we humans, with all our flaws, can find this sort of rhythm together. So for me, sometimes I just look at that. I just look at how on earth does this work? And I take the time every day to find a phenomenon. It could be any phenomenon, a social phenomenon, and figure out what's going on here. So an example could be I was at a jazz club the other day, and instead of just listening to the jazz, which of course I would enjoy, I also think, how do these musicians see each other in a jam session? Like, what's it like to be seen by the others? And what's it like for them to see the others in terms of the dynamic of coming together with very little structure, really, and play beautiful things? And how terrifying it is to come in with your trumpet and want to be part of, a jam session in a club like that. So I would turn on like a social lens, like how do these people see each other? And then I would look at that, and I wouldn't have any opinion about it. I would just look and record what I'm seeing. And to me, that gives me a direct relationship to the world instead of an abstracted one. And it makes me so curious about how something works. So I don't have a hard time convincing myself to do it. I just think humans are pretty cool.
It's so funny you mentioned that. Adrian and I travel a lot. We speak at a lot of conferences. And when I travel at night, I'm with you, we'll be coming into a city and you see this massive grid of light. And I always ask myself, how'd they get that to work? Like, I'm going to get to my hotel, I'm going to flip a switch and the light's going to come on. And boy, there was a lot went into getting that light to light, It really is a miraculous world that we live in if you stay and pay attention.
Yeah.
Hey, delightful conversation, Christian. Really engaging. And if there were one or two things that you wanted people to take away from the conversation today, what might those one or two things be?
I'd say don't lead life by looking through a window of abstraction. Like, go look at it without the window of opinion. Like, stop having so many opinions about things, and just have a look and listen for a change. I think we're teaching our children to have opinions before they've even observed. And I think if I should give a recommendation, there is a book that I recommend in my book that you should read before mine. That's called The Peregrine. And it's about a man that watches peregrine falcons in a place in England for 10 years. And describes the life of a falcon and its entire surroundings. And it's just the most gorgeous, poetic, detailed observation of something. And it just happened to be falcons. It could be the traffic, or it could be how electricians find their way around the world. But the poetry and the beauty of it is something I use every time I feel blue, or need to get picked up by something. So I would really recommend that everybody gets that book. It's by J.A. Baker, called The Peregrine.
I love that idea, the patience of studying, a falcon for 10 years. Wow. I mean, Chester and I, you probably know, we don't have a lot of patience, so we need to develop this. I'm going to pick up your book, and I'm excited to read it. So thank you, Christian, for joining us today. This has been just a terrific discussion. Love the insights, and I think this will bring down anxiety in all of us as we focus a little bit more and observe a little bit more of the world around us. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, an absolute delight, Christian. Thank you so much.
Me too. Take care.
Adrian, I think you'd agree, Christian, one of our more thoughtful and, really deep thinker guests that we've had on the podcast. I'm interested as to what were some of your takeaways.
This may be the most profound thing I have ever heard on our podcast. And I'm not being facetious.
Neither am I.
When he said, we don't know what we want. We zoom through life, and if you ask people, what do you really want? They don't really know. And how important is that to bring down our anxiety levels, to help others to figure out really what we're looking for. And they're very basic emotions sometimes. I want love. I want acceptance. I want this, that, or the other. Do we really think about that?
Yeah. I thought the 3 levels of observation were really interesting. The abstract, and then the level attention, the detailed focused. First is the level attention, the abstract. Second is detailed focus. You'll notice the red car or whatever. And then the third is that hyper reflection. Observe and see how people see. And I thought it was interesting because I thought, well, now he's like hyper focused on details. No, in fact, not at all. He says, I wouldn't be the guy that would remember the license plate number.
Yeah.
I'd be the guy that would be thinking about, why are people doing what they're doing?
Yeah.
It's really interesting to think more about not just the stuff, but why is this happening?
Well, and as I watched some of the videos of Christian doing his work, they would go into people's homes and they'd start pulling things out of their cupboards. So why did you buy this Jell-O? Why is it up front? Why is it, and it'd be very specific. And this person would be saying, well, I'm 7th level vegan. And he'd be saying, do you know this is the, and he'd kind of start digging below and really figuring out, kind of why they were doing what they were doing. And not just what they said, but what they really did. And it was really an interesting kind of, observation technique.
Yeah. That you know more about people observing how they live and what they do as opposed to what they say, which is interesting. I thought, the business application was really interesting. Look, I've hired thousands of people, and I'm looking for people that are present. That really do focus, that you feel like you're talking to them. They're not distracted by their phones or the weather or whatever. That idea of being present being the category that he's looking for. I thought that was great advice.
And also in the business sense, he was talking about, look, it's connecting with who uses your product in a way.
Right.
So, for example, if we're selling a car, how connected I am with the person who's driving that car. I remember one of the stories we used in Anxiety at Work, the book, was the story of the woman making she's in the manufacturing plant. She's very smart, getting bored, and eventually became a professor at INSEAD, and so the manager comes up to her and says, Susan, you're so smart. I want you to run this machine because it makes the red lights that are used, on the stoplights and the semaphores, and this is really important because if you don't do this right, people could die. And he really appealed to her ego and made it a very important. He took it down to the consumer level.
Right.
Are we developing that kind of empathy with our customers?
Right. Not just, I loved his example of homelessness, that if you deal with it in the abstract, it's numbers and it's issues. Go talk to some homeless people. Try to figure out what it's like to not know where you're going to sleep tonight. Particularly on a cold night or even a hot night. We're in the middle of this big heat wave right now. Empathy overcomes judgment, and judgment underlies observations. If you've got judgments, you won't see the same way. You won't observe the same way. Really interesting to connect those dots. I feel like I'm in a real deep thinking sort of moment after talking to Christian.
But I think this is good, as and why? How do we bring this back to Anxiety at Work?
Right.
Is the idea is the deeper we look at things, the more we're going to understand ourselves and others around us. That's going to be helpful because sometimes we go, I'm mad, I'm anxious, I'm jealous. We think these emotions on the surface, and as you and I do executive coaching, I'll often dig down with that executive and say, okay, you're mad. Why? Okay, now why? Now why? And you'll ask why several times until you finally get on to below, and they say, you know what, the real issue is I want to work on a project and see it through to conclusion, and I feel like I'm being bumped out at this, or whatever it is. You've got to get to that root cause, and you only do that through observing. So a powerful message today.
Yeah. Wasn't it interesting, too? How often have we got a new author on that recommends you read this book before you read mine? Have you and I ever said that about any book we've ever, this idea of observing a peregrine falcon for 10 years? I would be hard-pressed to watch a falcon for 10 minutes, really interesting. Well, Christian, what a delightful guest. And again, his book, and I want to make sure I get the title right here, is from Penguin Random House. It's Look, How to Pay Attention in a Distracted World. By the way, he spells his name, he's Danish, and so even though it's Mesbier, it's spelled Madsbjerg. So don't try to sound it out. That won't help you.
No, not even close. Yeah.
A book you should definitely put on your list to read about being more observant. Well, Adrian, as always, a delight to spend time with you. And for the many people that have tuned in to our podcast, you could be doing a million things right now, and you chose to listen to our podcast, and we're very grateful for that.
We are. And thanks to our producer, Brent Klein, to Christy Lawrence, who helps us find amazing guests like Christian, and to all of you who listened in. Please like the podcast, download it, share it. We'd also love you to visit thecultureworks.com. That's thecultureworks.com. You get free resources there, including the first chapter of that best-selling book, Anxiety at Work, Jess.
Yeah, and we love to speak to audiences around the world, whether it's in person, which is always great fun, or virtual. If you've got a global audience you'd like us to talk to, we talk on topics like culture, teamwork, resilience, and gratitude in the workplace. Give us a call. We'd love to speak to your event. Well, another wonderful time to spend with some really deep thinkers and my dear friend Adrian Gostek. Thanks so much for your time. And as always, Adrian, I'll give you the last word.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Until next time, we wish you the best of mental health.